When it comes to horror games, Fatal Frame is about as unique a series as you can get. The first game did have its fumbles with the puzzles, level design, and storytelling, but the second game is where they nailed it. It refined the exploration and story into something genuinely engaging, while strengthening the already fantastic core gameplay. If you're looking for scary games on the PS2, this is one of the best on the platform. So why stop there? There were things about 2 that I would like to see revised, my 2 major complaints being the easy difficulty and the toned down scares. With a third game, they could very well crank those things back up a notch. In a 2013 interview, series director Makoto Shibata stated, "Before work on Fatal Frame 3, I heard that the PS3 would be launching soon, so I conceived this project as a compilation of the past games and our final game for PS2. This would wrap up the series nicely as a PS2 trilogy." Acknowledging that the first game focused on scaring the player and the second focused on telling a good story, Shibata decided the theme of the third game should be fear lurking in the everyday. You know, the sensation of horrors intruding on your everyday life, taking influence from Japanese horror films where the main characters would experience hauntings close to home. He even looked to his nightmares for inspiration, claiming that he remembers his nightmares in great detail. This also inspired the game to take place in a dream world, with a dynamic between what the characters experience during their dreams and what they do in the real world. I have to admit, that does sound pretty interesting. Sort of like a Silent Hill 4 dynamic, maybe? But yeah, if this game was indeed based on his detailed nightmares, maybe it'll even be a little bit scarier this time. Here's hoping. So let's go. Let's give this thing a shot. Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented. Our protagonist this time is a young woman named Rei Kurosawa, a freelance photographer. I think it's really cool that the character this time is somebody that actually has experience with photography, instead of being somebody that just finds a camera, right? The very first thing this game shows us is the aftermath of a car wreck. Rei climbs out of the wreckage mostly fine, but she soon discovers that her fiancé wasn't as lucky, having died in the crash. Rei now leads a freelance day job taking pictures of haunted houses and anything of paranormal interest. The first Fatal Frame's protagonist returns here as Rei's assistant, which is mind-boggling that she would ever want anything to do with haunted houses again after the first game, but okay. During one of their outings to a mansion called the House of Sleep, Rei has a paranormal experience, encountering the ghost of her deceased fiancé. Following him through the building, she stumbles upon angry spirits, including the vengeful ghost of a woman covered in tattoos. Rei then finds herself waking up as the subject of a ritual, having Shrine Maidens hammer stakes through her hands and feet. Snapping out of it, Rei discovers that she's back in the mansion with Miku, and they head home. From then on, Rei begins having dreams about this mansion, which she decides to explore further and further each night, hoping that she'll find her fiancé there. This is where the core gameplay takes place, within Rei's dreams, and here you'll experience the typical Fatal Frame gameplay you've come to expect by now. Looking around, finding key items, solving minor puzzles, opening more parts of the mansion, and of course, snapping pictures of ghosts along the way. I really like what they've done with the combat this time around. We're back to the charging system Fatal Frame 1 had, but it still has the less arcade feel of the second game, lacking those dazzling visual and audio effects. Shutter chances in Fatal Frames are still a high focus of the combat, so you'll once again wait for the opportune moment when the ghost has her guard down and snap a picture to deal massive damage. And while I'm sure this all sounds fairly similar to before, the real change comes in how the spirits behave. Before, the easier ghosts would usually just walk towards you very slowly, but here, they'll deliberately walk into the walls to make them harder to keep track of. Some of these guys are way more aggressive than before, pushing your reflexes much harder than any of the prior games did. The spirits that fly around will be much more mobile now, and they really like to swoop in for that kill, so those close calls are now even closer. And the enemy designs are also much scarier than they were in 2, which was a very welcome change. I wouldn't say they're as consistently grotesque as they were in the first games, but the ones that are unsettling will push your comfort zones far past what the first game did. I did find the enemies way more intimidating overall this time too. Even if they're not terribly terrifying, their intimidating posture and more aggressive behavior had me finding myself much more scared of these things than anything the second game had to offer. This one's also way less forgiving with those healing items. I totally had enough to scrape by at all times, but just enough. In Fatal Frame 2, I had more than I freaking knew what to do with. I was invincible. Really glad they balanced it better this time. Film is also pretty scarce, but now it restocks itself between each chapter. I didn't really like that. I didn't feel inclined to save my Type 14 film because I knew it was just going to get restocked back to 30 next time I re-entered the dream. Anything above Type 14 will be consistent though. Your Type 61 and 90 will stick around and won't revert to a certain number each time, which I did at least appreciate. Also, your Type 7 film is no longer infinite, but you have so much that it may as well be. And again, that could arise the issue of running out of film and getting screwed over, but you could just as easily leave the dream and come back with full film and just try the chapter over again, so that's still not a problem. Oh, and you do not have to open the pause menu to switch film types every single time anymore. You can just do it on the fly with the D-pad as long as you have the camera open, and that is such a good improvement. I am so happy they have this. Another big improvement, at least in my eyes, is that the game is way scarier. Once again, they focused hard on scaring the player, and damn, did they do a good job. There's a lot of scripted scares this time, but nearly every one got me. Some of these are as subtle as you look down at a doll and the doll looks back up. Oh, this cutscene here really messed me up. Yeah, like, just cutting to that deadpan stare, no audio, total silence, cut back to Ray. Oh my god, I think this is solid proof that you definitely do not need loud sounds to scare the player. Sometimes just dead silence is even more unsettling. They reuse that doll scare later though. Okay, I already know. Okay, that did get me. Oh, playing with expectations, that's good, that's good. Oh, I really love this one. They give you this angle you normally don't see, so you know something's up, and you see these feet under the shower, and you're like, okay, whoa, what's that? Who's that? Jesus. God, the pacing of this thing is so good. You're drawn in, you're like, uh-oh, something's in there, and the thing in there is only there to distract you, so this part can catch you off guard. God, the scares in this game are so freaking good. This is also the first Fatal Frame game to have multiple playable characters. Well, I guess if you don't count playing as Mayu for like 2 seconds in Fatal Frame 2. These 3 characters have all been mysteriously having the exact same dream of the manner of sleep. Firstly, of course, we've got the main character, Ray, who we'll spend about the majority of the game playing as, but some chapters will have us in the shoes of Miku. Yeah, we're going back to playing as her again. Miku also has a couple of unique abilities of her own. Using the circle button, she can slow down time, which is super helpful for some of the faster enemies, especially for getting in those Fatal Frame shots. Obviously, you're going to have limited use of this power, and dealing damage to enemy spirits will slowly recharge it. But I think my favorite ability Miku has is this secondary charge. Once you charge up a shot, you can now hold down the R1 button to charge it up a second time, doing up to double the amount of damage in a single shot. I think this is really cool. It adds yet another aspect to the combat, something risky yet rewarding you can pull off to make the absolute most of your limited amount of film. The last ability Miku has is getting into tighter spaces that Rei can't, so she'll also be able to access certain areas that you previously couldn't fit through. The third and final character you'll play as is a young man named Kei Amakura. He was a good friend of Rei's fiancée before his passing, and is also interested in the case of the manner of sleep. Playing as Kei kinda blows, honestly. His camera obscura is super weak, only having 2 levels of charge by default, and they try to do some like weird stealth gameplay with him. Pressing the circle button will have him duck in place. You can't move, you just sit there and wait for the ghost to hopefully walk by and not see you. You'll have to do this to avoid the ghost of that tattooed woman, because unlike normal spirits, you won't be able to defeat her. This has got to be the most bare bones stealth I've ever seen. In fact, I did not even know it was here at first. I accidentally skipped out on reading the tutorial and spent the first chapter as Kei not even knowing there was a stealth button, so I just ran away from the ghost and I was fine. Kei's also able to move heavier objects that obstruct certain pathways, so just like Miku, he's able to go into certain areas that other characters can't. Probably only a man could move this. Oh no, okay, I know this is the game's way of saying, hey, you need this character to go this way, but like, man, you really could have picked a better choice of words. Based on what I've seen, Fatal Frame seems to have a pretty wide female demographic, so I imagine a lot of people saw this line and thought, oh, okay, I see how it is, alright, okay, alright, okay. As you finish each chapter, you'll then awaken back in the real world in Rei's house, and here she lives with Miku, who's her current roommate. There's a number of things you can do here to progress the story. You can develop photos you took in the dream world, and then you can give them to Miku so she can do research and figure out what the thing in the photo is. I thought this was kind of fun. Like, it doesn't necessarily always help you and doesn't always contribute to the greater story, but I don't know, it's just kind of nice to learn about all of these fun little nuances you find in the mansion. Like this weird hand coming out of this wall here. It doesn't do anything, and is never important, but if you do some research, it turns out it was a mummified human that just kinda got sealed back there. Learning about that stuff is just kinda interesting. This story really does like to chug though. Again, like Fatal Frame 1, it can be really freaking wordy and sort of aimless at times. I feel like they're trying to tell 5 mini-stories all at once, and none of them really contribute to the greater plot in a really meaningful way. I mean, the core plot here is actually pretty simple, but they beat around the bush constantly with all of these big details and long-winded notes. Honestly, it kinda reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 4. That game's plot is actually pretty simple. They just dump so much detail on you and use all of these big words and obtuse terms to make it sound more complex than it really is. It feels like such a huge step back from the focused and easily digestible narrative from the second game, and it's bizarre to see a game backtrack into problems that were present in the first one, instead of learning from the second. Which, speaking of, brings me to my absolute biggest problem with this game: the level design. Fatal Frame 1 only had a single map, and you re-explored the whole thing multiple times across several chapters. I found it repetitive and a little uninteresting. Fatal Frame 2 solved this by having multiple, smaller buildings that were easier to navigate, more fun to explore, and weren't as exhausting since they came in shorter bursts. But Fatal Frame 3 goes back to the single map style, having you re-explore a lot of the same rooms across many chapters, and to its credit, the map design is much more interesting than it was in Fatal Frame 1. The rooms all do stand out pretty well, and it is pretty easy to remember what rooms are where and how to navigate the place. But it is so repetitious. You will be going through these exact same rooms an incredulous amount of times, and sometimes it'll block off simple shortcuts randomly, so you gotta take the absolute longest route to your destination. But the worst part of it is easily the lack of direction. Too many times it's not at all clear where to go or what to do. Your only option is to explore around and figure it out, which, sounds normal. That would be fine if the map wasn't freaking gigantic. You will have to re-explore this entire thing just hoping you stumble upon what to do, and combine that with the amount of times you have to do it, it is a mind-numbing experience. They do sometimes have a ghost walk in a direction to lead you in the right way, but that only goes so far. When you find yourself in a room that splits off into 5 really long different hallways, well then, if I take the wrong way, I'm gonna be walking around for 20 freaking minutes before I come back and try another way. I think I said in my Fatal Frame 2 video that game could have used a little bit less backtracking, but no, this entire game is backtracking. A bunch of chapters are like, hey, find these 4 things, or find these 5 things, and you just have to go back to a bunch of rooms you've already been to all over again to pick up those items. It is the most blatant and irritating padding in the series thus far. Some parts of the map are straight up copied and pasted from the first 2 games. Chunks of the Himuro Mansion from Fatal Frame 1 are here, and chunks of the Kurosawa house from Fatal Frame 2 are here. And yeah, there is a story reason for this. It's a dream world, right? So it's only natural for the dream to take chunks of each person's memory. It draws from Miku's experience with Himuro Mansion and Kei's experience with All Gods Village. But listen, I just can't let it slide because of that. Like, I hear that argument all the time. You realize there's a story reason, right? But no, there's a story reason. There's a reason in the story why it's like that. Okay, I don't care. Yeah, like, you realize the people who make the game also make the story? Like, the story isn't concrete. The story can be whatever they want it to. You can write your way around all sorts of lazy decisions. That does not make you invincible to criticism. You're probably wondering why it is that Kei has experience with All Gods Village, right? So it turns out that he's Mio and Mayu's uncle, and he was investigating the disappearance of Mayu after the events of the second game. Yeah, they drag the characters from Fatal Frame 2 into this game's story, and it feels really shoehorned in. It's important to the plot that Kei was investigating a lost loved one, but making that individual Mayu does not matter to the story. It could have been any other character, and it would have been exactly the same. I don't know, it feels like it's only here for the sake of fan service, and after how ambiguous and melancholy the ending of 2 was, I feel like including a detailed aftermath for Mio in this game, especially as just a quick 2-second side plot, really detracts from how great that game's ending was. That'd be like if in Silent Hill 3, they were like, and James is back, and he's Harry's brother, and he's your uncle now, and he's doing just fine after yada yada yada. Like, that would just completely destroy the ambiguity and the power those endings had. I guess here's a good spot to give a quick summary of the plot, so as per usual, spoilers! Skip here if you don't want to hear the spoilers. So it turns out that woman covered in tattoos was part of an old ritual that was conducted to relieve people of their grief, particularly grief resulting of a lost loved one. What they would do is take an individual and tattoo onto her an image of this lost loved one, so that person with the tattoo would take on the grief and pain instead. Over time, this would happen again and again, taking on more and more tattoos, and by extension, taking on more and more pain and grief from various different people. This would much later be followed by the impalement ritual, which had shrine maidens nailing spikes through the tattooed girl's arms and legs, pinning her down to make sure she sleeps forever. Then she would enter the afterlife, bringing the pain and grief with her to the other side. In this case, however, the ritual failed, and she wandered the mansion as a vengeful spirit, cursing the dreams of people who lost loved ones. In Rei's case, this was her fiance. In Miku's, it was her brother, and in Kei's, it was his unnamed niece that I'm just gonna totally pretend wasn't Mayu. According to this curse, if you see your loved one in a dream and you decide to follow them, you'll mysteriously vanish in real life, leaving nothing behind but ash. I do really like how it develops that aspect of the curse. You meet somebody different that survived a plane crash and had to deal with the guilt of watching everybody else die around them. You then see her sharing that manor dream with you, where she pursues her dead loved ones and vanishes before your very eyes the next day when you find her. It's a really good way of showing you secondhand what happens to victims of the curse before it sets in that this is gonna happen to you too if you don't stop it. The final boss fight with the tattooed maiden can be really frustrating. Every now and then you're warped to this dark, slow motion version of the arena, and if she touches you here, it's a one-hit kill no matter what. And you can just get unlucky and have her spawn right in front of you, giving you a game over instantly. This drove me up the frickin' wall. I had to restart the fight like 10 times because of it. Otherwise, it is a pretty cool fight though, both mechanically and aesthetically. Trying to keep track of her as she warps around and flies into the air is quite challenging, and landing those shutter chances when she dive bombs you is tricky but super satisfying to pull off. Once you finally defeat her, you'll get a brief glimpse of the afterlife where you encounter Rei's dead fiancé. Embracing her one final time, he decides to take the tattoos from her, carrying on everyone's grief instead, and peacefully leaves Rei into the afterlife. Rei wakes up, finally free of the curse, and then credits. I do like that ending quite a bit. It's definitely a much happier ending than the series usually goes for. And as usual, there is a bonus ending if you replay the game and do some side stuff, but there's not much new here. There's no different cutscenes or anything. The final scene is exactly the same. The only difference is that you get some photographs during the credits that clarify every single character is now safe and sound, and it even shows Mio's now friends with Miku and Rei, which is like, okay, I don't really care. And again, with how tedious I found this game to get through, I'm just not giving it a second go to get that. I'm sorry, it's just, no, it's not worth it. Overall, I do think this is a pretty good plot. It just didn't really need all of these excessive notes and details to beat around the bush with, and after how well delivered the story in the second game was, it's bizarre to see them regress back to the problems the first game had. You know what? It feels more like a sequel to Fatal Frame 1 and not Fatal Frame 2. You know what I mean? Because it feels like they looked at Fatal Frame 1 and thought, let's make this again, except bigger and better, because it's structured the same and plays mostly the same as Fatal Frame 1. It's just that the map is bigger and the game's way longer, where in Fatal Frame 2, they really took a step back and rethought the structure altogether and made a much better, albeit slightly different game. It's so weird to see them approach it like that. It doesn't really feel like progress. There is a lot of cool things this game does that I do really like. I like playing as the multiple characters with the different abilities, I like the tweaks to the enemy behavior and the much needed challenge, and the scares, they're easily the best in the series so far. This game is terrifying and I love that. But the level structure and the progression are enough to kill it for me. I just found it so damn tedious to get through. Honestly, to the point where I think I would straight up say I don't really like this game. I don't think it's an awful game overall. I don't think it's objectively bad when you take a step back and look at the broader picture, but it has aspects that strike such a painful nerve with me that I don't really ever see myself replaying this game. Definitely wasn't what I was hoping for. I guess my final verdict would be, it's okay, but it just really didn't click with me personally. Next up, Fatal Frame gets weird. This is after Nintendo got their hands on it, and this is also where a lot of people tell me the series gets bad, but I don't know, I think I would rather take jank and weird motion control over aimless level design any day, so I know this game has at least one of those. Let's hope it doesn't have both.